Today has been a huge day for Trudeau looking like an idiot. We have multiple stories showing he's wrong about pretty much everything he talks about, and it's making my sore back just a little bit less sore. We also have a video talking about the importance of what is happening in the changing housing markets with prices and with mortgages. We are seeing some serious trends that will need to be addressed and some minor predictions for what is going to happen with rate cuts. And I don't think people understand how big that is for Canada. It shouldn't be as big as it is, but it is massive. So we have Trudeau saying possibly some of the dumbest things I've ever heard him say to date. We have some economic updates. It's a big one today. Let's get into it.
Will the Prime Minister axe the taxes so Canadians can have a staycation?
But the report from the parliamentary budget officer that Pierre Poilievre frequently uses to show why he thinks the carbon tax should be scrapped has a major issue. The PBO admits his 2022 analysis of the consumer carbon tax mistakenly also included the impacts of the industrial carbon price big polluters pay.
We will be updating our report. We want to be sure that this time we will not have the same issue in a couple of months.
But Yves Giroux believes his update will give the same conclusions. That despite getting more in rebates than they pay in the carbon tax, the majority of Canadians would see those benefits erased once the economic impact of the tax was factored in.
That is huge news that a mainstream news channel is saying the carbon tax is costing Canadians money. Trudeau, you're wrong. You have been misquoting this from the beginning. The budget officer is saying he made a mistake, and you are using the wrong math. And I have felt like I've been shouting into the ether to axe the tax because since the beginning, a lot of you probably found me through my axe the tax videos early on when I talked about it. It doesn't include the the national economic problems that Canadians deal with the carbon tax. What they said is what your consumers pay on oil and then what they get back. And again, they always use their stupid little statistics. 8 out of 10 Canadians get more back in the area where the carbon tax applies. Where it applies, not nationwide. This is cut and dry now. The budget officer has said, Trudeau, you're wrong. You're an idiot. The carbon tax is costing Canadians money. We are now increasing inflation. Canadians are losing money because of the carbon tax. Buy my shirts down below.
I find that very difficult to understand.
Something the environment minister disagrees with.
That flies in the face of what more than 300 economists have said that show that 8 out of 10 families in Canada where the federal pricing system is applied get more money than what they pay.
They have one talking point. They repeat the same thing. It's been disproven over and over again. They're just liars. They're so dumb. It's so frustrating.
But that argument hasn't landed with Canadians, as the Conservatives enjoy a double-digit lead over the Liberals in the polls.
The reality today is that if people have a strong opinion or any opinion about the carbon tax today, they're probably not going to be changing their minds anytime soon.
The PBO update on the carbon tax is actually late. It was supposed to come in the spring, Farah, with Giroux now saying it should be ready by this fall.
Coincidentally, his report was late and didn't manage to make its way in before the spring increase on the carbon tax. Wonder why that is. I'm extra angry today because of my back, guys, so I apologize. But let's get into this next video where Trudeau basically calls himself an idiot and also proves to us that he has no idea how numbers work. He has no idea how money's created or anything. We're going to get into it. Urgh.
The Prime Minister has had a revelation. In an interview with the Halifax Chronicle Herald, he told how he responded to people asking for him to spend even more government money. And he said, and I quote, "As soon as you do that, inflation goes up by exactly the same amount." Right? Right. Why didn't I think of that? Oh, goodness. Spending money you don't have actually causes inflation. If he's in the middle of having epiphanies, has he also realized that budgets don't balance themselves?
Our country is producing nothing. We need oil and gas. We need our natural resources to be used because guess what? If you keep spending government money, guys, if you've been watching this video, how many times have I said government spending is making inflation worse? Trudeau knows that. He doesn't care. He's just trying to buy more votes. He's spending like crazy. They're building in $40 billion into the deficit, not for economic growth, just for free stuff. It's inflation, it's inflation, it's inflation. It's only going to get worse, and he has said it himself. Now let's see what his response is to his own quote.
The Conservative Party has been using that approach about concerns on inflation to stand against things like national food programs for kids or dental care for seniors. They have stood and objected against and even campaigned against dental care for seniors over the past many months. But we've delivered to over 100,000 seniors of the 2 million who've already registered for dental care the support that they hadn't gotten in years or even decades. But he stands against it with some made-up excuse around inflation when delivering services delivers for Canadians.
His retort to saying that spending causes inflation is to say, you think that? Well, we're going to keep spending more and keep making more inflation. Your argument sucks. And it's like, you said this. We know that the spending is increasing inflation because guess what? You're bringing in all the immigrants and then prices are getting worse. What happens? Because there's all these bodies coming in and those prices are being paid when people are not actually economically productive enough to be keeping up with these increases. And then the government spends to help facilitate the increases and it gets worse and worse. And they talk about it in the video after this one, but let's finish this.
He calls his own words a made-up excuse, Mr. Speaker. You can't make this stuff up.
He said that when people ask him, can you send us more benefits or send us an extra $1,000 a month? Well, he responds, as soon as you do that, inflation goes up by exactly the same amount. Right?
Speaker, that is exactly why over the past years we've been focused on bringing down inflation by supporting Canadians.
By spending
and it is working. For the past 4 months, Mr. Speaker, inflation has been down in the Bank of Canada target range while we continue to increase supports for Canadians, increase dental care for Canadians with Conservatives that campaigned against, supports for seniors, supports for young people, increased investments in childcare, bringing childcare fees down to $10 a day. These are the investments we're making that do not add to inflation, but add to Canadians' well-beings as they're making ends meet.
So basically, every time he says something that's this wrong, all I can think of is that Billy Madison clip where he's like, nothing you said at any point was a cohesive statement. Nothing you said made any semblance of sense. We are all dumber in this room for listening to what you've just said. Obviously, I misquoted the Billy Madison thing, but that's all I can think of when he talks and he says these things that are just completely wrong, not even close to correct. But let's get into this next one because I was also surprised how much she digs into immigration being a problem in this one. She doesn't say it as such, but we can see it. Let's get into it.
I want to bring back Frances Donald. She's Global Chief Economist and a strategist at Manulife Investment Management, who's been our guest host this hour. And the housing story is one that you're watching closely as well.
We're watching it, but we're watching it for different reasons that we used to watch housing as economists. We used to say, okay, well, if people lose their jobs or they're facing higher interest rates, then we should see housing weaken. And what's been really strange is that we've had one of the largest increases in interest rates in many Canadians' lives, especially when adjusted for debt, and yet housing has not broken. And that's because we have an entirely new factor at play, and that is really substantial population growth. And it is.
She even avoided saying the word immigration, but she's saying it's propping up everything. We've never, ever in the history of Canada had the level of immigration that we have now, and it has an impact to the housing market. This is not a bad thing to say. It's a realistic thing.
Trumping just about all the standard analytics and data points that we used to examine. Bank of Canada had a great chart in its April monetary policy report, chart 15. It's seared into my memory. It showed that we are building about 250,000 homes a year about in Canada. But household formation, that's new families that need homes, is running almost double that, John. So for every house we build, we're building up this backlog of 2 families that need it. And the bigger problem is that we're operating at 100% capacity when it comes to building in Canada. So we can't even increase that building number in a substantial way. So even though I see recession risk is elevated, even though we know consumers are struggling under the weight of higher interest rates, especially those that are going to be renewing in the coming year, we're really being dwarfed by population growth, just overwhelmingly providing demand and providing a bid under housing.
And that's why I keep saying that, because if we have 2 families for every 1 house, it's just simple math that can't work. And the only way, she said, we're building at 100% capacity right now. So the only way that we can make that math equation work is cutting the demand side. That's the only way.
So if you're a central banker or the head of the Bank of Canada and you're trying to navigate this part of the story on what you do with interest rates, what do you think is the best way to think about it?
Well, the Bank of Canada themselves has been a little more vocal lately that, well, housing is not really going to be the main driver of interest rates. Now, they do need to monitor, is there frothiness coming from the credit channel, for example? But I think we're going to hear more from the Bank of Canada, or maybe we should, that they cannot be responsible for the outcome of housing when they are being dwarfed by such substantial population.
Yes, so I'm a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me in the link below if you want to work with me, my team, all the way across Canada. But the reason I'm talking about that is because free money, aka lower interest rates, will have an impact on the price of housing. However, it only has so much impact when you are increasing the population, like she's saying. So we can blame the Bank of Canada in some capacity. This is the thing with these equations. It's complex. It's not one single thing that's wrong. It's, yes, the immigration is off the charts, so the demand side is increasing, and then you make money cheaper and accessing money becomes more accessible. As more money is created, then people can buy more houses and all these things. So it's a multifaceted thing. So yes, we can't just blame the Bank of Canada, but of course, interest rates will have some level of impact on that.
Growth.
And at the same time, the reality of some of the we were talking about inflation before the break. Some of the inflation metrics that we've been watching every time we get an inflation report come out of the housing market because of this higher interest rate environment. So that is the one thing that they can control. Where policy rates are, they don't control obviously what's happening with the population itself, but what do you make of the inflation that's coming from things like higher rents or higher mortgage costs? How do we have to think about that?
If you make a table, as we do, it's real fun, of every single component in CPI, shelter is the predominant one providing the lift, which is why a lot of economists have started doing more CPI X shelter to get a sense of what's happening. Now, Canadians may feel uncomfortable with this. Shelter is one of our largest personal expenses. Why would we exclude it? But the Bank of Canada and all global central banks is going to have to start making some decisions. Do they risk recessions? Do they raise unemployment to try to bring down inflation that is less susceptible to interest rates? I think we're at a big conversation about what central banks can do in a world that is really being dominated by more supply side factors. Similarly, food prices are...
That's funny because she said supply side factors. Notice she's very conveniently skipping the demand side because no economist wants to get out there and say, we need to cut immigration. They're all worried about getting lambasted in the media or getting fired because of it. But the point is, as she said, so the actual numbers of inflation that have been increasing is because year over year, as a mortgage renews, they say, oh, your mortgage payment is higher because the interest rates are higher. Oh, rents are higher because interest rates are higher. So that's making inflation seem worse on the aggregate. So the overall numbers going up by a lot because the shelter component is a high percentage portion of that. So she's saying, oh, well, as the shelter component keeps being up, like that's making our inflation worse, which is very true. That headline number could be lower and we could start cutting rates, and that would actually help. It'll double drop us on the inflation moving forward if they do start to cut rates fast enough as they renew, and ideally creates less mortgage stress for what we're seeing moving forward, because 2025, 2026 will be brutal if we do not cut the interest rates. But I just think it's so funny that she's saying, like, we're just dealing with supply side. Why is there a supply issue? Because there's a demand issue.
Aren't real high in Canada and elsewhere because you and I are eating too much, John. They're high because of global factors, supply chains, geopolitical risks, droughts, weather events that are occurring outside of our borders. Can the Bank of Canada bring down food prices? At the margin, maybe, but we got to have some conversations about just how powerful central banks are and how much pressure should we put on them to solve problems they can't.
Well, they give us a lot to talk about, so we definitely like
There
to
is
ask
that.
those questions. Real quickly, we're almost out of time in this block, but the idea that if there's a signal from the Bank of Canada that it's time for a pivot, and maybe that's next week, some people say, oh, that's going to lead to a whole bunch of people coming back into the housing market. What's your view on that?
My team and I were talking about this because the Bank of Canada has already signaled that a pivot is coming. You might remember Governor Macklem telling us June is on the table.
Right,
that was the
right.
headline of the day last month.
You know, I'm going to be surprised if they do end up cutting next month. And I think that's only even just next week. Because unfortunately, we have to do what the Americans do. We can't be too far ahead of them when it comes to cuts. Don't forget to get the Axe and Tax merch. I'm a real estate agent in London, Ontario. Reach out to me in the link below for both of those. Thank you guys so much for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe and have a great rest of your day.